Okay, testing. I have some slides, which I believe are on their way, but I'll get started while they're being loaded. So, our session is about mobilizing investment for renewable energy. And I'm going to speak to you in my 7 to 9 minutes, which I promise I'll try to keep to, about fossil fuel subsidies. No, you're not sleepy after lunch. I did say fossil fuel subsidies. Why are they relevant for renewable energy, you may ask? And the answer is it really depends on what you do with them. So I work for an international non-profit research think tank called IISD. And we have a program that specializes in energy subsidies called the Global Subsidies Initiative. And over the past few years, as part of our work stream, looking at fossil fuel subsidies globally, we've been giving increasing focus on an idea of a clean energy swap. And the reason for this is that we see there are a lot of countries around the world, like India, which have got substantial fossil fuel subsidies, and over the past 10 years have been taking extremely dramatic efforts to radically reduce the amount of money they're spending per year on fossil fuels. At the same time, we see very few countries taking big steps to reinvest the savings into clean energy. Often savings are reinvested in paying down fiscal deficits, they're reinvested in social protection, or they may be reinvested in non-energy infrastructure. We think all of those are great things, and countries should be encouraged to do this. But we also want to ask, are countries considering the extent to which a share of savings can also be reinvested in sustainable energy supply? So India is actually a leader in clean energy swaps already. So the graph you can see on the slide here is a result of a research report we brought out in December last year with ICF India and ODI, where we estimated total central government subsidies to different forms of energy. So you can see there's this yellow column from 2014 to 2016, which is decreasing quite substantially, and that's oil and gas subsidies in India. So they've fallen by about 75% over the past 3 years, over which we've got data available. Coal subsidies have remained pretty steady, but decreased a little bit. And in the same period, we've seen subsidies for renewables increase quite radically by 350%. So in our view, this is a clean energy swap in action. When I say a clean energy swap, I don't mean that you need to have a complicated policy where you track, savings in one area get put in a special fund and they get spent somewhere else. We're talking about big picture efforts to redirect flows of public funds away from fossil fuels, which don't need the assistance, and towards renewable energy in strategic ways. So this is one of the reasons we're really interested to work on this topic in India, because we think the momentum is already there, and is there work that ourselves and others in the energy policy community can do to identify new opportunities where swaps can create public finance to help support renewables. So to explore this, we have been working in cooperation with Terry over the past year on a case study where we wanted to say, well, let's look at a specific swap and see how this might work. And we decided to look at kerosene subsidies. So kerosene subsidies have fallen dramatically since 2014. Between 2014 to 2016, we've seen savings of over 25,000 crore. And that's fantastic in terms of fiscal objectives, but we need to be concerned about the households who previously had access to kerosene that was subsidized, who now have access to a smaller allocation of kerosene, and as we look forward, may see kerosene subsidies eliminated completely. So because of this, we are interested to look at solar technology and to ask, well, if kerosene is predominantly being used as a lighting fuel by rural households, and those are the households we think could be most negatively affected by reform of fossil fuel subsidies, could we redirect a share of savings into solar energy, and if so, what could we do? So we felt that this was pretty well aligned with all of India's major goals in this space. I won't go through them now because we don't have a whole amount of time. We covered some key options for designing a swap, which we thought were kind of useful to think through in terms of considering these same objectives for other swap kind of options as well. So we asked ourselves, who should be the beneficiary of this kind of policy? And we really felt that there were two main answers. So often when we talk about this idea of a swap, people tell us, why would you want to invest in solar lighting, appliances? People are going to be connected to the grid anyway. And our answer is, indeed, tremendous progress has been made towards connecting households across the country. However, we know that there will still be some households who don't have access to electricity for some time. And there'll also be other households who maybe have access, but it isn't very reliable. And what are the ways in which solar energy can be used to help cover those periods where they don't have full access to the reliable electricity that they want? There's also questions about where you should transfer this kind of subsidy. And there are kind of formal descriptions of how these sorts of transfers can work in India under the DBT system. So under the DBT system, you really have two main choices. One is to try to create a transfer to households directly, ideally after purchase and involving authentication of the intended beneficiary, or you can transfer the subsidy to the producer of a good, though again linked to specific beneficiaries being able to purchase the technology. Then we asked which technologies could you viably support? And we found this very interesting because we started off really looking at entry-level solar lanterns, but we wanted to consider other things as well. And we actually added up how much per household the government is spending on kerosene subsidies. We found that all of these are viable options. So average government expenditure on kerosene is about 1,700 rupees per household per year. And that's an average between the amount that was being spent in 2016 and 2014, because there are quite different levels of subsidization in each year. We then have to remember that households are still paying something for kerosene. So these subsidies are encouraging private expenditure, which could also be redirected towards technologies like solar. So when we consider that, we estimate that there's around about another 1,250 per year. So when we are looking at technology costs, we're seeing entry-level solar lanterns at around 3,000 or less. And the lowest level costs for solar home systems and mini-grids were also as low as 3,500 per year, and then growing higher depending on kind of capacity and services provided and so on. So in our view, all of these technologies could feasibly be supported amongst households with kerosene subsidy savings. And for our study, we decided to focus on what we thought was the lowest hanging fruit, which was pico level PV. So we're actually publishing today the outcome of this study. So I have, if anybody's interested, a number of little postcards with information about where you can download this study, a few copies of the full publication as well. This is a study that we worked on, as I said, with Terry. And what we did is we explored the readiness of the market to already provide solar lighting at the same cost that people are spending for kerosene. We identified that there are at least 15 pico PV products based on a number of criteria that can reliably replace kerosene already at an affordable price. And often, these technologies are also offering more than just lighting. They have perhaps dual charging facilities where they can be charged from the grid as well as from solar, and most of them are also capable of charging mobile phones. We also found that there is a wide range of business models which, should there be interest in trying to stimulate kind of purchases of solar energy amongst low-income households which are ready to provide this technology to very wide parts of the country. In terms of the areas where we felt that assistance was needed to really make this concept work, we did a number of field visits in UP and Orissa. We found that there was very strong interest from stakeholders, but that there were also a few challenges. So one challenge was targeting. I mentioned who we think the key beneficiaries of this kind of policy could be. So to target this kind of policy, you need to know who are the people without access or who are the people with access, but it's not very reliable. So we didn't find a great deal of good data on that, but we also think that that data is being created already by the many agencies across India working on energy access issues and trying to improve the data quality behind them. we found one concern was to do with lack of information about non-verified products. So in my previous slide, I showed you 15 technologies that we felt were already candidates to make this kind of technology option work. However, there are possibly many more. And one challenge in India right now is you would need to be very careful to create a subsidy policy that encouraged products that were both verified and unverified, so that small actors in the market don't get disadvantaged. Lastly, the key problem was financing, which I think we all already know. So in our view, the business case for opting for solar instead of kerosene is very strong for households. The challenge is, how do households or businesses who want to service households spread those upfront costs over the 2 years, 3 years that it takes to pay back the technology? So this is exactly the kind of area where a swap policy could make a difference for Pico PV sales. In terms of what next, IISD is going to continue working on this issue of swaps in India over the next year. We'll be updating our estimates of total energy subsidies in cooperation with CEEW and continuing to work with Terry on the concept of kerosene solar swaps. But in terms of kind of framing this discussion today about how do we generally mobilize investment in renewables, I wanted to kind of leave you with some questions about if the idea of a swap and these available resources is a compelling one, what are the other key areas where this could be a source of finance that could make a huge difference? So some ideas I've got on my slide are, perhaps this is an area where renewable energy technologies for clean cooking, which currently are kind of far behind LPG as viable options to service the market, could receive some necessary public support. Other key possibilities are investments required to ensure grid balancing or electric vehicles. And when we come to discussion, I'd be glad to hear any other ideas about other potential options. So that's it. Thank you very much. And